Hi, I'm Patricia Marshall, and I'm here today with Larry Powers. He's written and published a number of books with Luminare Press, and today we're going to chat about a few of those and a little bit about his process. So before we start, I want to say congratulations, Larry. We just published your 8th book for you, and I understood you have a 9th one on the way. So that is just a tremendous accomplishment. But I also want to ask you, because I know you got started with writing and publishing somewhat later in life. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start writing and what your process has been like?
Well, it's been a long journey. You're right. I didn't start publishing fiction anyway until my mid-70s. So I just turned 80 last December. And so my first published fiction book came out from a different publisher in 2017, and that was The Home. And it wasn't an indie publisher. It was supposedly a traditional publisher, but it was very low budget. And I wasn't satisfied with the production, the design, or anything else. So I had a 2-year contract with them. And as soon as the contract was over, and in fact, it was during that time that you and I met in Portland at a literary arts festival. And I mentioned to you that I would like to see the book republished with a different publisher. And we talked about it. And sure enough, in 2019, when the contract was up, you got the manuscript. Your designers did a fantastic job with the cover. And so The Home was published through Luminare. And I haven't looked back since. But as I said, the publishing journey, actually, I had been publishing technical literature, both in the fields of laboratory medicine and in marine biology for quite some time. So most of my background is academic, either in the clinics or in ecology and biology. And in fact, I have a textbook out with Mosby, a big St. Louis publisher. And so that was published back in 1989. And a number of monographs since, but I've always wanted to do fiction. And in fact, when I was 15 years old, I submitted my first science fiction short story to Galaxy magazine, promptly got it rejected, and then took a hiatus from fiction for quite a while. But I've always wanted to do that. I've taken several literature courses. I've taught literature at the college level, and in fact, taught it when I was in Russia during a Fulbright. So, it's always been on my mind to go ahead and try to publish some stories. And
Well, that is just great. So I know you published The Home in 2019 with us. That was a work of fiction. What inspired that? Was that based on true events, or?
It was. Yeah, it comes very close to autobiographical fiction, although I did spend over 6 months in a children's home, in an institution, which is what the book is about. And it's a coming of age story, but it's for adults. It has some R-rated material in it. And it is based on quite a bit of my own experiences growing up in that place. And in fact, a few of my short stories that have been published subsequently are also somewhat autobiographical. And yeah, I know one of the questions that we talked about discussing was, what's the easiest things to write? Well, obviously things based on your own experience, things where you can draw from memory, are probably the easiest things to write. So it was a pleasure to write that and everything, but it was also a learning experience, because your first novel is always full of mistakes. It's full of false starts. And so I don't consider it as maybe sophisticated as some of my later stories, but certainly my heart was in it.
Okay. So that's interesting that you say the things based on personal experience are the easiest to write. I don't always find that true. Especially fictionalizing them. I think that's tough. But on the flip side of that, what are the hardest things for you to write? I know you wrote, and I want to interject, I know you wrote a historical novel, New Albion Sunset. Was that more difficult, or what was the process like?
In the sense that I had to do a lot of research for it. First of all, it's set in the 16th century. A lot of it's about sailing, because it's about Drake. And so the geography was easy because it's set in the Northwest. But I have very little experience with that kind of sailing. I mean, big ships and all the vocabulary, the terminology, that took a lot of research. So from the research standpoint, that was the hardest. And I wanted to be sure that I didn't make any major mistakes. I didn't want people saying, "Oh, well, you can't say this," or this is totally outside of history. I wanted to try to make it as historical as possible, and I included an appendix, which was basically a history of that whole thing, because it turns out that Drake never visited California, despite all the celebrations of the Bay Area and where I grew up, in fact. Drake never set foot in California, and that's all been revealed fairly recently in a series of books that show that he was in the Northwest. And so I sent him there, and it's fictional in the sense that I put him in British Columbia, but it took a lot of research on my part. And yet, because I had done a lot of that research actually in place, I had actually visited California. I had talked to people in Oregon who were biographers and historians. And the research is just, overwhelmingly in favor of an Oregon and Washington, sailing for him. And so I decided to write that book as a result. The cover is what really fascinates me about that, because the cover is done by a Russian artist who had visited England and done some work on Drake himself. And almost all of his artwork is, pastoral paintings and settings and a few portraits. And this is the only historical thing he had ever done. And I came across it on the internet, and it was just absolutely perfect for the book and its setting. So I wrote him in Moscow and said, "Can I use your painting?" And he sold the rights to me. And I've even got a big reproduction of that same painting, a digital reproduction, in one of my bedrooms as a bonus. And so I was very happy about the painting that we chose for that cover.
Yeah, that is just great.
The other hardest thing, and it's interesting because it comes back to what you were saying about personal experience. The book I'm working on now, book number 9, is actually about my Fulbright experience in Russia, which took place over 9 months from 1999 to 2000. Now, I'm trying to fictionalize it as much as possible, but it's really based on a very meticulous journal, a memoir, if you will, but I don't want to publish it as a memoir. So I'm changing a lot of the names, and I'm inventing a few things and inventing some dialogue and trying to convert it to something that's compelling. And I don't know if you are familiar with the author Amor Towles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moscow and the Lincoln Highway, really reading Rules of Civility, which is his first book. He is right now one of my favorite authors. I mean, I just think his command of the English language and the way he describes things is just great.
Yes.
So I'm trying to use him as an inspiration for this novel, and not duplicate him, but at least pay attention to how he takes ordinary people and ordinary events and makes them compelling without car crashes and explosions and other things.
Right. Right. They're complex stories, well told, but not sensationalized.
I am finding that the most difficult of all the books that I've tried so far, to really try to convert this memoir into something that is compelling, that'll hook the reader, and yet have that kind of characterization in it.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I can't wait to see it.
It's going to be long, by the way. It'll be the long. Right now, it's over 500 pages, and I'm trying. And I'm trying to condense that somewhat. I'm trying to really go through and do the typical deletion stuff, but it's going to be a longer book.
Okay, so that leads to another question. Do you work with a writing group or a developmental editor or anything?
No. I have belonged to writing groups in the past, and I've got some friends who, in fact, I'll be meeting with a group in August up in Salem, and that's a writing group, and we're going to have a whiskey and writing session, and so and
that's always great.
It's a great group, and my friend also is an indie writer, and he publishes the Driftwood mystery series. His name is William Cook, and he's turned out to be a great support. And he's one of my beta readers, and I send things out to various people who comment on it, and I've been very lucky.
Okay, so you do have that. You work with beta readers, yeah. Okay, I always think that's really important, because when you're writing, it's so easy to just like stay in your head.
Oh yeah.
And I know everything I write, I think, is brilliant. And then, I read it a year later and I'm like, what was I thinking?
Exactly. In fact, when you mention that, it always reminds me that after I get through with a draft, I just put it aside for at least 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Don't want to even look at it or even think about it much. And then come back
Hmm.
to it and try to look at it with fresh eyes. It's not always easy to do, but
Right.
you really need to step aside from it for a while and just kind of let it mull and let some other people take a look at it and then come back and try it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really important and a really important part of the process. Let's switch up for a minute and talk about publishing. You mentioned that your friend independently published, and you, of course, independently published because that's what Luminare Press does. We help
Right.
authors who are independent publishing. What's been the biggest difference between that and your traditional publishing experience, whether it was your academic work or the first book you did with a traditional publisher?
Um, it's really interesting because although I don't think it's for everybody, I mean, if I was 40 years younger and really just starting out, I would probably still try to get an agent and do the
Yep.
traditional thing because let's face it, it's a lot less expensive.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I look at where I'm at today and the amount of time I might have left to still keep writing, I can't afford 2 or 3 years in press. I can't
Hmm.
afford to do the give and take that it requires to go through the traditional route anymore. I mean, you don't see any final results unless you're already a big time author and they're trying to rush your work out. You're going to sit there and you're going to mull over it for a while. So that's one advantage of doing independent publishing. If you've got somebody who's a great support group like Luminare is, um, you get the results pretty quickly. I mean, I've had turnarounds of 3 to 4 months from the time
Yeah.
I submitted the manuscript to your editors till the time I see the thing coming out. It's
Hmm.
actually being printed. And usually in less than 5 months, I've actually got the books in hand. I mean, I've received them and I'm signing them and I'm sending them out to friends and things like that. So that's the turnover time is a huge advantage. But
Yeah.
the other thing I like a lot, and I've given talks to a couple of universities here, and I've talked to our public library. I've given some
Hmm.
talks on indie publishing, and I have a list of things that pluses and minuses. Of course, the biggest minus is just cost. I mean, you're going to put
Right.
some money out to do that.
Hmm.
I always
Yeah.
warn people that you get what you pay for. Hopefully,
Hmm.
if you've got a good indie publisher, you will get what you pay for. And I always feel that what I've paid for and what I've received has been well worth it. Other thing I really like though is the control.
Yeah.
When I'm working with designers for the cover or the interior, it all comes back to me and they say, "Well, does this work?" And everything. A good example is this last book, The Gristmill Mistress.
Hmm.
I submitted the photographs, but they blended them in a very, very artistic way. And of course, they chose the cover designs and everything. We talked about the different colors for the background color and the fonts and everything else. But basically, I feel like I really helped design the cover because
Hmm.
I did. And in some cases, I've let them go ahead and select it. I know Falling in Love and Other Misadventures, my first short story collection with you, they found the cover image and it fit just perfectly. And in fact, I've got all of them. This one, in fact, this is Falling in Love.
Yeah.
You probably get
Oh,
it.
that's great. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yes.
remember that quite well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's from the feature story in there. It is science fiction, which is still one of my favorite genres. It's what I started out with, and as a kid, and I've always wanted to publish. But I also like doing a lot of the other things. So all of my short story collections are sort of a mishmash of
Uh-huh.
about every genre you can find. And then Gristmill Mistress, I finally got a couple of horror stories in. So I've done everything but westerns.
So you're doing, yeah, you're just covering a range of genres there.
Fun.
Have your books found a receptive audience?
Um, Depends on what you mean by receptive audience. The people that have bought them or read them, friends and so forth, as well as some acquaintances, have liked them. And
Hmm.
some of them have given them high praise, but is it selling? No, because first of all, I'm not a marketer. And that would be the other big disadvantage with going indie. You're responsible for doing a lot of your own marketing, unless you want to
Hmm.
pay additionally for a lot of services. Now, I will say that as an indie author and having my books on Amazon and other places like that, I get phone calls every so often, scam calls, basically offering for several $1,000s to market something for me. And it usually means packing my book along with thousands of others to go to a book fair somewhere, like in Miami or New York or something. And I realized that there's very little marketing there, that I'm paying a lot of money for nothing. So unless I really get a hold of a marketing firm that has a good reputation, it isn't worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to interject here that is like one of the most popular scams right now. Yeah. People saying they'll represent your book at the Frankfurt Book Fair or the London Book Fair, and they absolutely do not.
Well, it usually starts out with, well, we really loved your book. And the first time I read it, I says, well, what did you like about it? And she had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, all she had was a title in front of her, which one of her, email or one of her internet surveyors had found on Amazon.
Yeah,
we want to represent.
Yeah, and they will often say Amazon recommended your book, but Amazon doesn't do that. So that's really a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
But we have some good partners who can help with marketing, but marketing is, and I always tell potential clients this, it's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
And it comes back to me for what your goals are for the book. Like if your goal is to be writing and putting it out there and giving it to your friends and families and things, that's okay. You don't, you are rarely is an independent author going to make millions of dollars. Yeah. But there's always a chance, and there's always a chance it'll be picked up by someone else. But it is, selling the book is the challenge, I think. And I will say, I don't know that I think independent or small presses do much marketing these days either. So it's a challenge for any author, no matter how you publish a book.
Well, and of course, the other thing is just the sheer competition. Because instead of 1,000 new books being released by, 7 or 8 big publishers, now you've got tens of thousands of books being issued by big mom and pop.
Millions. Over 2 million, a year.
And so, it's nice because probably most of the books, and there are some really good ones. I mean, I buy independent books through NIWA, my Northwest Independent Writers Association. Occasionally, because I'm featured on their pages as well. And so when I see a really interesting book, I say, oh, well, I've got to have that. I got to take a look at that. So, that support group is really good. Willamette Writers also has a very good support group. Yeah.
Well, Larry, I think it's probably, we'll probably want to wrap this up, but are there any other things you'd like to add before we do?
Well, you had mentioned one of the questions was working with indie publishers and everything, and I just want to compliment you and your staff. I mean, your editors have been fantastic. I've had 2 or 3 different editors over the years. People like Lori and some of the others have been just great.
She's great. Yeah.
It's a good give and take. And I've learned a lot by working with them. As I said, each book I'm hoping gets a little bit better. I don't repeat the same mistakes each time. And so, I'm looking forward to our continued collaboration.
Well, anytime you're in the area, we'd love to see you. Larry, thanks for being with us. We appreciate you as a writer and as a client, and wish you the best of luck with that book signing and with getting your books out there.